Okay, so we've got a lot of great information to go over, so I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. I just want to double check that everyone can still hear me because I'm having some technical issues this morning, so I apologize for my weird audio. But I'm going to assume that we're good to start. So
Yes, you sound
welcome.
good.
Yay, thank you. Okay, welcome to our webinar, Navigating FY26 Brownfields Grants, Eligibility, Threshold Criteria, and Application Strategies. I am Brooklyn James from US EPA, and I am joined by our partners, the Center for Creative Land Recycling, and we're here to talk to you guys about the new grant offerings for the FY 2026 cycle. Okay, so just a quick housekeeping slide. Here's our agenda. We are going to talk about the timeline changes, what the grant offerings are, some of the changes that are in the Notice of Funding Opportunity, eligibility, application, package, and all the pieces that need to go in it, and some tips. And then I'm going to hand it off to CCLR to talk about their services. They're going to give tips from their perspective, talk to you guys a little bit more about data platforms, and give some more resources for putting your applications together. And just a quick reminder, this is a Zoom webinar, so you're not going to be able to access your camera and your microphone, but if you have questions as we're going along, feel free to put them in the Q&A box. And if they're simple questions, we will answer them as we go, but otherwise we will answer them at the end. And I did want to mention that this webinar is aimed to piggyback off of OBLR's webinars, that they went into details about each of the grant offerings. And ours is going to go a little bit more into depth about the nuances and the requirements of the different grant types and threshold and eligibility and things like that. So if you want some more background, some more details about the grant types, our website has recordings and the slides from those presentations that happened a couple weeks ago. So quick disclaimer, just want to clarify that while solicitations are open, EPA personnel can only answer questions about threshold, eligibility, administrative issues, and clarifications about the NOFO. We cannot meet with applicants to discuss your draft applications. We can't provide comments or suggestions on how to improve your story or your narrative, but CCLR can provide and comment and review draft applications and answer those more particular questions that are super specific to your project. So reach out to them for those types of questions, reach out to EPA regarding threshold, eligibility, and clarification on the NOFO. And I just wanted to put this disclaimer in here that EPA is not going to be supplying an AI-generated summary of this training, just because AI-generated summaries don't always capture correctly the training topics and the material. And if you do receive AI-generated summaries, just know that they're not officially from EPA. All right, so I just want to quickly introduce our presenters. So like I said, my name's Brooklyn James. I'm a project officer at the US EPA San Francisco office on the Brownfields team. And I'm joined by my colleagues, Lisa Hanusiak and Stephanie, if you want to wave and say hello.
Hi there.
And hi, I will let Devin introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Devin Rainwater, and I'm a program manager at the Center for Creative Land Recycling. You'll be hearing from me a little bit later about CCLR's grant review services. So I'll pass it to Joelle to say hi.
Thanks, Devin. Hi, everyone. I'm Joelle Greenland. I'm a senior planning consultant with the Center for Creative Land Recycling, and I'll be talking to you more about tips from CCLR, and looking forward to seeing you then.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to start by talking about what the timeline is going to look like for this grant cycle. As you might have noticed, the NOFO came out a lot later this year, but EPA is going to try our best to compress our reviewing schedule this winter in hopes to make the award announcements happen around the same time. So we're anticipating making award announcements in June, so maybe a little bit later. Typically they happen in May. Again, the deadline for the actual submission of your application will be January 28th, 2026. We will be doing our reviews throughout the winter time, and then come June, we anticipate making the announcements of the awards. Then June through September of 2026, that's when the awards are established in our system and the paperwork's finalized and a work plan is negotiated. And then we anticipate that funds will be available and the grant work can start in September to October timeframe of 2026. So even though we are having applications open a lot later than usual, we're going to try to get announcements out and funds available in the same kind of September, October timeframe as usual. But of course, these dates are subject to change, excluding the application date that is locked in on the 28th. So I'm going to briefly talk about each of these grant types that we're offering. Like I mentioned, OBLR created some videos that go really into depth about these grant types. So feel free to take a look at those after this webinar if you want some more information. But we are offering 3 assessment grant types, our cleanup grant and the multi-purpose grant this year. So we're not offering revolving loan fund this round. So for our community-wide assessment grant, this one is going to be up to $500,000 over a 4-year project period. And you can use these funds to do things like community outreach and engagement, creating brownfield inventories, doing your environmental assessments like your phase 1, your phase 2, your AAI, and then also cleanup and reuse planning. So the community-wide assessment grant for states and tribes, we call it CWAG Street. This covers the same sort of activities as the community-wide assessment one does, but this one's limited to state and tribal entities. But it does offer up to $2 million over a 5-year project period. And under this grant, the entities would be required to have 3 distinct target areas, identify 5 priority sites, and do a total of 10 assessments throughout this grant. The Assessment Coalition Grant, it also covers the same eligible activities as the previous 2, so community engagement, environmental site assessments, cleanup and reuse planning. However, this one would have 1 lead entity that partners with 2 to 4 non-lead entities to submit 1 application to complete brownfields work in 3 distinct target areas. So we are offering awards up to $1.5 million over a 4-year project period. The aim of this grant is to help lower capacity communities that don't necessarily have the bandwidth to manage a grant all on their own, to partner with a larger entity like a county or a city to do these assessment activities. So there are a few changes to the requirements of who can be eligible as a lead and a non-lead and what the target areas have to look like. And we're going to go into that in a future slide. So moving over to our cleanup grant, this one has 2 pools of funding, a $500,000 and a $4 million, both over a 4-year project period. With these funds, you can perform the actual remediation of the contamination. You can do community engagement and outreach, site-specific reuse planning, and also cover regulatory oversight fees. This grant does have a few extra requirements. So the applicant has to be the sole owner of the site and cannot be responsible for the contamination. And then as well as the site has to be fully characterized by the time the grant work starts. And we'll talk more about that later as well. So the last one is our multi-purpose grant, and we're offering up to $1 million over a 5-year project period. And under this grant, you can perform both assessment and cleanup activities. In fact, we do require that you complete at least 1 phase 2 environmental site assessment, 1 site cleanup, and 1 reuse plan. the target area that you identify cannot have communities in distinctly different geographic areas. So that's to say your target area has to be a contiguous area. It can't be a neighborhood on one side of town and a downtown corridor on the opposite side of the city. For example, it has to be contiguous or touching each other. All right. So I just wanted to pop this chart up here to show kind of an overview of what I just mentioned as far as funding, project periods, and estimated number of awards, so you can kind of get an idea of how competitive each grant type might be this year. All right, so now I wanted to talk about some of the bigger changes that you'll see in the Notice of Funding Opportunity this year. And the first one I want to discuss is within the Assessment Coalition Grant. So the limitations on who can be a lead member have been removed from the guidelines. So the list of eligible entities is now the same for both lead and non-lead coalition members. But an additional requirement is that the target areas must be identified for each coalition member, and those target areas cannot overlap each other. And they also must be within 3 distinct municipalities. For example, if a county and let's say 2 cities were going to apply for an assessment coalition, the 3 target areas that they would identify could be City 1, City 2, and an unincorporated area in the county. That would be an example of an eligible target area. And then the other addition to the threshold criteria is that the lead member must have the legal authority to expend grant funds on behalf of the other non-lead members. And if the lead member of the geographic boundaries don't encompass the non-lead members' geographic boundaries, then you have to provide documentation to demonstrate that you have the legal authority to expend grant funds outside of your geographic boundaries. All right, moving on. I know this is a lot of information, so if you have questions, again, just put them in the Q&A. So the next thing I wanted to point out in the NOFO is the changes to the FY26 cleanup grants. So there were some updates that were made to the site characterization threshold criterion. So this criterion has always been there, but now we are requiring that if this assessment is not fully complete at the time of application submission, or a phase 2 report is not complete, or a phase 2 has identified that additional sampling is needed, then you must provide a statement that affirms there will be a sufficient level of site characterization done by June 15th, 2026. So that statement needs to be included in your application package. That will tell us, hey, it's not sufficiently characterized at this moment, not maybe January 28th, but by June 15th, it will be. And that must be included. There's a little bit more information on what this letter could look like, or the statement, on our types of funding webpage. So feel free to take a look there. And as a reminder, I just wanted to mention, reviewers can only use what is in your application to determine eligibility. So we can't use outside sources. We can't go do research to make determinations. So please be sure to include all of your documentations, all of the relevant information in your actual application, so that you don't accidentally disqualify yourself for not being eligible. Speaking of eligibility, I am going to share a little bit about who's eligible to apply for our grants. In general, we have general purpose units of local government, which are cities, counties, townships, special districts. Tribes are eligible. We have 148 federally recognized tribes in Region 9. Nonprofits, 501c3, or LLCs whose managing or sole members are nonprofits, 501c3, are eligible, as well as our states. And that might include, in Region 9, DTSC, ADEQ, NDEP, or other states as defined by CERCLA. I also wanted to point out when you might become ineligible as an entity to apply for a grant. If you yourself are the entity that is liable for the contamination on the site, this makes you a responsible party for the contamination, and therefore you would not be able to apply for funding on that site. Also, for-profit and individual entities are not an eligible applicant, and nonprofit 501c4s that lobby for the federal government. But if your entity is a nonprofit 501c4 that does not lobby and you meet the criteria of another eligible entity, you may still be eligible. I would just say if you're a 501c4, please reach out to your regional Brownfields coordinator to double check your eligibility. Okay, so now I want to talk specifically about threshold. Threshold is extremely important because if your application does not pass threshold, we don't even get the opportunity to read through your narrative. So this is really, really key. And these are the different pieces that you're going to have to put together in order to solve the threshold puzzle. So first of all, you're going to have to explain your eligibility. State what type of entity you are and if it's an eligible entity on the list. Next, you're going to be asked to disclose whether or not you have multiple applications in the pot for FY26. So if you're applying for 2 different grant types, you have to talk about mention the other one you're applying for here. They're also going to ask you to discuss community involvement in the project prior to this application. It's going to ask for, if you do have an existing Brownfields grant with EPA, to prove that you've met the expenditure requirements, the drawdown requirements by the correct date for those existing grants. You'll have to disclose whether you have named any contractors or subrecipients prior to the application. And if you haven't, state that you haven't. And then you will also have to attach all of your application submission requirements. And those include all of your federal application forms, which we're going to look at what those are in a few slides. Your application information sheet, your narrative proposal, this is the meat and potatoes of your application. For community-wide assessment grants and for cleanup grants, the maximum is 10 pages. For multipurpose assessment coalition and CWAG Street, the max is 12 pages. You're going to want to attach your threshold criteria response page, and that's the page that's going to have the answers to all of these threshold requirements. I highly recommend that you submit this because it's extremely helpful for reviewers to quickly see that you have met all of those threshold criteria. So you'll also have to include your state or tribal environmental authority letter of support and or stating it's the sufficient characterization. And then also just know that the applications are submitted through grants.gov and only through grants.gov. Oh, and my blue box, my important box. If one of the threshold criteria doesn't apply to you, do not just skip it. Make sure you state no contractors or no subrecipients have been named for this project, or state that it does not apply to you. So that way reviewers aren't left wondering, aren't left searching for that information, or that you don't just get disqualified. So if you have any questions about these things, this is the type of stuff you can reach out to EPA for answers. Okay, so quickly, I wanted to share a few extra threshold requirements or general requirements for the cleanup grant, because there are more than for the other grants, and it's really easy to miss these things. So just a quick reminder, I mentioned this already, applicant has to be the owner of this site, must be exempt from CERCLA liability at the site, and has to be one of those eligible entities that I showed before. Before you can be able to apply for a cleanup grant, you have to have completed a phase 2 environmental site assessment at that site. You also need a draft analysis of brownfields cleanup alternatives, otherwise known as an ABCA report or equivalent document. So a lot of times, if any of you have been through our targeted Brownfields assessment program, you get this deliverable at the end of that. It just talks about the different cleanup options and feasibility and costs of those. You have to have one that's at least a complete draft by the time you apply. You also need to have your letter from a state or a tribal environmental authority that ensures the site's fully characterized, like I mentioned. The community notification ad is really, really important. So this must go out no later than 14 days before application submission. So I think that would be before January 14th of 2026. And in that community notification ad, you're going to want to include information for how your community members can access and provide feedback on the grant application and the draft ABCA, and also the date and the time, the location, or the link to the meeting that you're going to hold. And that's the last piece, is the public meeting. This has to be held to discuss and consider comments on the cleanup grant application and the draft ABCA. So you have to allow your community members to provide feedback and show how that was considered into your application. And one other thing I want to mention is just the 14 days. You have to show proof that the ad went out at least 14 days before the application. So even if it's one day less than 14, the application will unfortunately have to fail. Okay, so like I mentioned, I was going to show you a list of all the required forms that you're going to need to submit with your application package. This is definitely a lot, so make a list and check it twice, because you definitely don't want to forget any of these pieces when you go to submit your application. And also on the next slide, I'm going to show you where you can find samples or blank forms for these too. All right, so here are some of my highly recommended resources. We have our EPA MARC webpage. This is like the landing page for all of the other resources that you might need for applying for this grant. So you might want to favorite that one, add it to your bookmarks bar. We also have a summary of the guideline changes. I just did like a very brief overview of the changes, the biggest ones, but if you want to see like line by line what the changes were, you can see it there. Our FAQs are highly rated. They have lots of answers to questions that are super common. So if you're not quite sure and you don't necessarily want to ask just yet, see if you can find the information in the FAQs. Also, we have a new grant submission checklist that we're offering this year. This is just to help you with planning. It's not going to be required to be submitted or anything like that. But feel free to use that to help you keep track of everything. There's the link for the sample federal forms. And I also linked the videos that go more in depth about the grant requirements if you want some more information about that. Okay, so wrapping up on my last slide here, I want to give you some general tips from EPA for your application. So first off, the guidelines are long, but please be sure to read all the way through so you're not missing any requirements. Not all of your reviewers are necessarily going to be from your region, so consider this when you're describing your community. Reviewers might not be as familiar with your geography, your culture, your demographics, so make sure you describe it clearly. If information is requested in a particular section, please respond to that criteria in that section. It's difficult for reviewers to go searching throughout your application to find it, so it might be missed altogether if it's not in the correct section. Again, I can't say this enough. If the criterion doesn't apply, state that and explain why. Don't just skip it or leave it out. Number your pages, use the titles and the headings that are given in the criterion to organize your narrative. That's just going to be a lot more helpful for your reviewers. Keep your attachments nice and neat. Use that application checklist that I provided a link to on the last slide. Try not to use too many acronyms or organizational jargon. And then also just make sure it's readable. 1-inch margins, 12-point font, Times New Roman, simple font type so that it's easy for the reviewers to read. Okay, I talked a long time, but with that, I'm going to pass it off to Devin from CCLR.
Thank you so much, Brooklyn. So I will start sharing my screen. All right. So thanks, Brooklyn, for taking us through all of that great information. So as I introduced myself in the beginning, I'm Devin Rainwater. I'm a program manager with the Center for Creative Land Recycling. And I wanted to share a bit about the TAB program, or the Technical Assistance to Brownfield program, that is available to you to support you through putting together your application and submitting your application for the EPA MAC grants this year. So I know that this is the Region 9 MAC announcement webinar, but some of you might be from outside of Region 9 or 10, Region 9 or 10 being Center for Creative Land Recycling regions. So this map shows each of the tab providers for each of the regions, as well as how to contact them for free technical assistance, as well as free grant review services, which I'll share more about in the coming slides. And this map with all of its links and contact information is also available on CCLR's website, and you'll see it in the chat as well. So this is a bit more about CCLR. So it's CCLR or CCLR for the acronym, and we are the tab provider for Regions 9 and 10. So that means we have a grant from EPA to provide free technical support and free services to communities, nonprofits, municipalities, and community groups that are taking on brownfields projects or going after brownfields funding. And you can see in 2024, we provided assistance to 328 unique communities. We provided training and workshops to develop skill sets of almost 2,800 land reuse practitioners, and we helped secure almost $40 million in EPA Brownfield grant funding for Regions 9 and 10. And of the entities that were selected, we supported 91% of those selectees for that year. And so this is how we support communities, municipalities, and nonprofits. So this is a lot of text on the screen, but I wanted to include it all to give you kind of a visual representation of the extent of our work. So we work in training and education, we support redevelopment and financial planning and road mapping. We provide guidance through assessment and cleanup requirements, and we also provide plenty of stakeholder and community engagement services. So all of these descriptions of these services will also be in the slide deck for you to look through later. But most importantly to you all right now, we provide free grant review services to EPA Brownfield grant applicants. So we can help you at each step of the process along the way, besides actually writing your grant for you. So we can help you plan out your application narrative approach, help you engage stakeholders and partners, help you navigate data platforms, which I'll also go through in the next few slides. We can connect you to grantees that have had success and also share some successful MAC grant applications, which is available on our website. Provide resources to help you navigate the application process, as well as provide a thorough review of your application, including multiple rounds of edits if you get it to us early. So this is another slide with a lot of text, but that's because this is an example of a completed rubric scoring sheet, this is provided to each applicant that we work with. So this, fictional CCLR reviewer filled out this example score sheet for a client after, they received a draft to review, and then they passed along that draft back with red lines and comments on the draft as well. So this is what you can expect from our reviewers, is this in-depth rubric with individual scores for each section of the narrative, in-depth comments and suggestions on your actual written application. And all of this comes along with a bit of tough love that is meant to improve your application and get it through EPA review, because we really want to see you succeed. And you can see a testimonial from a review recipient there as well. So to send your draft to CCLR, these are the instructions. And so a reminder, this is for applicants in Region 9 and 10. And if you're outside of Region 9 and 10, you can refer back to the tab provider map to reach out to your own tab provider to receive these services. So this is also a lot, but I want to go through each of these requirements or suggestions so that you can send your draft, or so that you can send your draft grant to CCLR. So you want to email the narrative of your Brownfields grant application to markreview@cclr.org. And we say by January 7th of 2026 so that we can provide you 2 full rounds of comments. This is not a deadline or a requirement for us to review your draft. We will be reviewing drafts up until the deadline, but we highly recommend that you get it to us early so that we can provide multiple rounds of comments and reviews for you. And if you're sending us a draft, it should be complete and within 2 pages of the page limit. If any large chunks of your draft are missing, or if it's way over the page limit, you'll hear back from me, as I'm going to be the one behind this email address. You'll hear back from me and say, this isn't a complete draft, but I'm happy to schedule a meeting or exchange some emails on how we can help you get to having a complete draft. So we'll be there for you in technical assistance meetings as needed. So when you send your draft to us, please attach it in Microsoft Word format. If you send it as a PDF or a Google Doc, I will email you back and ask for it in a Microsoft Word format. And please name it with the applicant name, your state, the grant type, with review request. And you can see an example there from the city of Whoville, Oregon. They're looking for a cleanup review. CCLR will also provide feedback on your application information sheet, your threshold criteria response, and any other application materials upon your request. So we will not automatically review these materials, but if you send them to us with a request for us to provide comments, we can do so. And a specific note for consultants. So if you're sending CCLR an application on behalf of an applicant, you must include the applicant's contact information and copy them on all communications with CCLR, and we won't begin an application until we can coordinate with the applicant themselves. So again, if you do so, you'll be hearing back from me asking you to include the applicant in your emails. So I will now pass it over to Joelle to talk about some tips from CCLR in putting together your application.
Thanks, Devin. Hello, everyone. 'Tis the season. Yes, the NOFO came out later, but hopefully everyone who is interested is also breathing a sigh of relief that it's not due, say, January 5th. Okay, now that would be really mean. But no, you have till January 28th. So hopefully everybody knows that date. 48 days, not that we're counting down, but 48 days. So start early. Devin gave some great info about getting your applications in. Besides all that information, don't wait for the perfect written grant. You can send them in, and we'll look at them as many times as you need. Last year, I think I worked with somebody 4 times, and it was perfect, and it was great, and we all felt confident, and it was awarded. So don't think it's a one and done. This is a very iterative process. So if anybody's ever worked with CCLR or myself, you know I'm going to always ask you, know your why. So this is one of the biggest things as far as if you don't know your why this site, why am I even writing an application? Is it just because someone said, hey, did you hear about the Brownfields funding? You should go for it. That only gets you so far. So really know your why, because this is going to transcend not only the application, but also should be a part of how you work with your stakeholders, your community. Knowing this is going to be evident as we review, we know who the people are who know their why. If not, you're going to get that tough love comment saying, we can't see your why, we can't hear your why, you need to find your why. So I cannot say this enough. So how does it align with your community projects, the projects that exist, your community plans? Being a planner myself, I love reading about um, how people thread in or weave in other planning processes that will build off what you're trying to do with the grant. Um, and, what are the resources that you have and what resources you don't have? So we're looking for, blue ribbons. What are those outputs and outcomes, but also those blue ribbon moments? Because those are your metrics that, pretend it's your money. I mean, if if you don't see the actual like what the eventual outcomes might be, then your reviewer isn't going to know it either. So make sure things are easy to read. Forget the vocabulary for SATs and stuff. I know it's SAT time, but leave the superfluous words out of there, the adjectives, they'll get crossed out really fast by us. We don't like words ending in ly. They tend to be very like, why? Why are you so great in your community? Or, saying we're low income. Yep, great. Okay, not great, but you have to know your data, and anything that you say has to have data that supports the statements. If you don't, then it's just going to make you less competitive than the other grants that are using, data, the reference material that Devin was relating to, the data resources. Please, please, please look at those things. I can't stress enough how much data will bolster your grant. Repeat the NOFO language back. Really read the guidelines. It drives me a little crazy. I'm going to be a little personal here. When people just think, oh, it's just similar to last year. Really, guys, this is a new day. Check out, it's not just the formatting. Really read the guidelines, understand them, and understand what EPA is asking from you, right? Repeat the language back in the question. And not only will it reiterate what you're trying to say to them, but it'll make sure that the reviewer, you're getting your point across thoroughly and concisely. No verbose language, okay? Make sure all sections are addressed, just like what Brooklyn said. Address everything, even if it doesn't apply to you. Tell them why it doesn't apply. Okay, cannot underscore that enough. Grant requirements, deliverables, the outputs are the numbers. Anybody has watched one of our CCLR webinars on MAC grants or MARC grants, outcomes and outputs are very, very different. Outputs are quantitative, outcomes are qualitative, right? World peace, right? Okay, bigger picture. Remember, you have to make everything defensible. You have to have a nexus between things. You need to have a compelling story, and that story should have a through line throughout the entire grant application. Do not go back and forth if you repeat things in sections that really you shouldn't be writing about. You're talking about the location of the Brownfield site in the community section, community engagement section. Okay, you already were supposed to address that. So make sure you're talking about just what the question is asking in that section. Okay. Take the reader on a story. Have an external reviewer provide comments. I love this. If somebody doesn't know anything about your project or anything about Brownfields, perfect. Give it to them to review and say, what'd you think? Right? If they don't understand what you're asking for, then that's a good litmus test. Okay. One of my favorite things, how I started was before EPA made them public, I would actually call successful grantees and say, would you mind sharing your narrative sections? I don't need to know your financial stuff, but would you mind sharing me your application? This is a very small, very collaborative community, Brownfields. And I have yet to meet a community that says, no, we're not going to share that with you. Okay. So ask, there's successful grants on tab pages, CCLR's web page. We have successful grant applications from past years. So please, please, please look at them. Next slide. So I know it goes without saying, but there is attachment A, attachment B. Just follow the guidelines. The threshold criteria, just like Brooklyn said, there are certain things, for instance, okay, beyond the community notification and the cleanup grants, right? Okay, I'm going to read this. Just like Brooklyn said, the APCA has to be available, but the applicant must allow the community an opportunity to comment on the draft application. The draft application. And you go, oh my gosh, wait. So our draft has to be written? Yes, your cleanup grant has to be made available for the public. So if you have a public meeting and you don't have a draft application, does it have to be finished? No, it just has to have a draft application for them to understand what you're applying for. Okay, so in addition to the APCA, you need to have a draft application also available. So, just those kind of things, just really read the guidelines and the threshold criteria. Pass, fail. Programmatic requirements, know what you're getting into, right? What to expect when you're expecting an EPA grant, seriously. It's a 4-year commitment, sometimes a 5-year commitment, depending on what grant you're going for. This is not a, we're going to wing it. Okay. Is it difficult? I don't think it's really difficult, but you really do need to know what the programmatic and the administrative requirements are. Okay. So just check them out. The timelines, Brooklyn did a great job with the timeline in the very beginning. Know that when you can expect. Don't take summer vacation. Nope. It's not going to happen in June because you're going to be working on a work plan, okay? Manifest the grant, but know that somebody's going to be working on a work plan in June, July, okay? The grant administration, yep, you get it. There's going to be reporting, quarterly reporting, grant requirements, compliance. This is federal award money. So if you're not aware of, and Devin, you know what I'm about to say, 2 CFR 200. If you don't understand 2 CFR 200, if there's nothing to write it down and check it out and Google it or chat GPT it or DeepSeek it, whatever. Know what 2 CFR 200 is. I'm going to leave it at that. You have to have a village. You can't do it alone. We couldn't do this webinar alone, right? I mean, R9's great. I love EPA R9 and R10, but we can't do it alone, right? Brownfields are a complicated, multifaceted endeavor. Is it worth it? Yeah. I wouldn't be doing this for this many decades if it wasn't worth it. So I applaud everyone who's going for it this year, and please reach out. We're here to help you. And good luck. Devin, back to you.
Thank you, Joelle. Ending on that awesome, hopeful note. And it's in line with where I'm going to go next with sharing another resource from CCLR. So as Joelle said, data is really important to use it in your application to back up your why, with the goals of your project. Why are you doing this? Why are you asking for EPA Brownfields funding? You really want to use data to show the impact of brownfields on your community and show the community demographics to express need for the movement on brownfield revitalization projects. So, reach out to us to access resources, as well as if you want to talk to us about what resources should I start with? How can I use this? Because I know that we're throwing a lot at you. But I definitely wanted to highlight this resource because community demographics, community data is really important in these sections that I have on the screen, as well as other sections of your grant. So we can take a look at the pages of this resource. Here are some of the national resources that CCLR has, or that CCLR lays out in this data platforms guide. And you can see that it's different from last year. We no longer have CGEST and EJ Screen to support our applications. So it's really important to check out these other resources for describing social conditions, economic indicators, public health. It's here in the guide. And here's another page for specifically Region 9 resources. So you can look through these, find your state, and find some of the data resources that can be useful for backing up your project narrative. So in addition to CCLR's data guide, which will be linked in the chat and on these slides, here are some other resources to help you along your, while you write your EPA MAC grant. We have CCLR's tips on getting started. And this is from last year, from last year's guidelines, but the tips in here are still very relevant. A lot of them align with what Joelle just went over. We also have links to successful grant examples on our webpage. We've got a webinar on writing a MAC application. We also have linked here EPA's tips on getting started with MARC applications and EPA grants management training, which was linked in the last slide, as well as a guide to writing a grant budget written by Joelle this year. So that's updated as well. Another really significant resource that I'm pushing along with the data guide is the MARC Grant Helpful Hints written by CCLR and Kansas State University over at National Tab. This is a significant resource that can help you as you are writing your grant. It goes through each section of the guidelines and adds expert helpful tips for each section and how to improve each section of the of your grant. This document is also something that CCLR reviewers might turn to while we're reviewing your applications. So this, just have in mind that we're reading it as an EPA reviewer might read it, and using these helpful tips. So if you use these while you're writing the grant, you're going to be in a really good spot. And also I want to shout out these upcoming events. So EPA is hosting a grants competition process webinar on December 17th at 10 a.m. Pacific time, which will have some more information on the process of applying for MAC funding. And then National Tab is hosting a Tips from the Tabs webinar where you'll hear from all of the tabs across the country in a roundtable discussion as we all share different tips for tackling MAC. And you can stay up to date with all of these events at CCLR's website on our events page. And with that, I will pass it back over to Brooklyn.
Awesome. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Sweet. So thank you for all of that really great information. I just wanted to shout out the deadline one more time. So January 28th, 2026 by 11:59 p.m. Eastern. Applications must be submitted through grants.gov. Make sure your account is active. Make sure you have access to your UEI number. And if you're applying for a cleanup grant, the application needs to be done and shared prior to January 14th. Sorry, draft application needs to be shared with your community prior to January 14th for the community notification requirements. Next slide. All right, so that brings us to the end of our webinar. Thank you so much for attending. Here are all of our contact information for the people on the call. And we also included some folks from Region 10. If you're from Region 10, reach out to these people for eligibility questions and questions about the application. So if you have more questions, feel free to start typing them in the Q&A box, and we can go ahead and address the ones that are in there right now.
Okay, so it looks like Lisa and Devin and Brooklyn have started responding to some of the questions that you typed in the Q&A. So you can check those out on the Answered tab. But there are a couple that I think we want to review verbally. So the first one that I'll pose to the group is, what are the specific criteria or documentation for a Council of Government applicant?
I apologize because I was not able to I was having a technical difficulty with trying to answer these questions. Dawn, let me check with our attorney so I can get a real answer for you, because I could make something up, but I don't really know. I will follow up.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, next question from Emma. For the multipurpose grant, I know that you must own the remediation site. Do you have to own the assessment sites as well, or can those sites be held by private property owners?
Emma, you do not have to own the sites that you assess, only the cleanup site. And it would be okay to assess a private property that is within the target area identified in your grant, for which you have access consent.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, another question. Related to language, with moves away from EJ Screen and the Justice 40 initiative, should we include racial demographics or only focus on income level, population size, etc.?
Anonymous, you're welcome to use any available relevant information to support your application.
Okay. Amber says, I have a partner who is a lease on federal land. Is this allowable? Who has a lease on federal land. Is this allowable?
No. Brownfields funding, you cannot spend it on property owned by the U.S. government.
And if you have questions about site eligibility, I think that would be a good opportunity to contact your regional representative, who for us is Lisa. So Lisa's email is in that chat at some point, and we can drop it in again. So feel free to reach out. Another question is about this webinar. How is the process webinar on the 17th different from today's webinar?
So I think I can answer that. I included that because it looks like EPA will be going into more depth on the logistics of submitting a grant. We are not affiliated with that webinar as far as I know. Lisa, do you know anything more about that webinar?
I don't know what that webinar is. Is it
Okay.
an EPA webinar?
It is. So it's coming from, it must be coming from EPA headquarters on the logistics of submitting a grant. But yeah, it's not related to EPA Region 9 Brownfields or CCLR. So just know that. But I wanted to, make sure everyone knew that it was coming up and could check it out if they would like to.
Is it just about applying for federal grants in general?
Yes.
I don't see any other questions at this time. Let me scan one more time. Maybe just because there were a couple of questions about this, Lisa, we could just reiterate it verbally, but could you talk again about the coalition assessment grant and the target areas and the coalition members and sort of what the guidelines say?
Yes. All right. We need a coalition assessment. It can be, it needs to be a lead, usually one lead coalition member, and then 2 to 4 non-lead members. And there needs to be at least 3 target areas identified that are not overlapping. All of the members need to be eligible applicants. You need to demonstrate that those applicants are eligible as part of your threshold review. And there needs to be 1 member that has never before received a MARC grant from EPA. And those are the big takeaways. I don't know if anybody else, have I missed something that's key?
I think that's the key information. Follow-up question, how many sites per member?
I don't see anything other than there needs to be 3 target areas, because part of the assessment grant is you're identifying sites through developing an inventory, and that's the purpose of the grant. I know that the CWAG Street grant, the community-wide assessment for states and tribes, does have some requirements for the number of sites, but the community-wide assessment grant does not.
Thank you, Lisa. Another question. So this person says, I'm new to EPA federal grants. What is the indirect rate allowed? If it's slow, like 5%, can we line item administrative expenses like software as a service tools, administrative staff time, etc.?
Yes, there is, this has just changed too. So forgive me if I don't know off the top of my head, because I think the indirect rate recently went up, and I would have to research it to give you correct information. But there is kind of a basic rate that you can apply, or you can have directly a negotiated rate that may be higher. I'll have to get back to you with the actual percentage, because I don't want to misquote the requirement. I'm searching through my information to try and find it on the fly, and I don't have it right now, so apologize for that.
Okay, we made it through the Q&A as of right now.
All right, it looks like there's no more questions. So you have our contact information up on the screen here. And as a reminder, EPA is available to answer any questions about eligibility. And for any other questions, if you're in Region 9 or 10, contact CCLR. We're definitely here to help you. So you can reach out to me. My email's on the screen there, devin.rainwater@cclr.org, and I will make sure that your questions are answered. But yeah, on behalf of all of us, I'd like to thank everyone for joining the webinar, and please enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you to all of our panelists as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.